Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we'll be talking mainly about something that is going on in India, a little bit of what we saw yesterday as well, and discussed in the show with regards to a video that has gone viral in which a Muslim woman wearing a burqa is being harassed by a mob of Hindu students who are chanting slogans against her for wearing this burqa. Furthermore, we've seen that in southern India, this debate has intensified and has made the lives of Muslim women in colleges even more difficult. There has been a call for a shutdown in schools in southern India, particularly in Karnataka state, where there is already a hearing that has begun with regards to a petition on this ban. It had adjourned yesterday without issuing a ruling, but of course we've seen that so many Muslim women are standing up for their right to wear a hijab in their colleges and to go about practicing their religion freely, wear whatever they want to opt for. Despite the kind of criticism and the backlash that they're being faced with, both with the authorities and within the school environment, as well as with what their students have been responding and talking about. We've seen that female students have also not been allowed to sit in the exam hall, and they've been spoken about in a way that because of their wearing of the hijab, the school life is being disturbed, and other classmates are being disturbed from getting education properly. This, of course, points towards what is going on in India for such a long time, with the way that life is becoming increasingly difficult for Muslims in India, but with particular reference to the situation of women in India and their right to wear whatever they choose and the right to practice their religion freely. This is, of course, a step further as well. But there are so many courageous women, just like the one that we also showed you yesterday, who are standing up in front of these crowds and talking about what it is that they have a right to wear, which, of course, gives us hope that perhaps there is something that still can be done about it. We'll speak about this in further detail in the show and try and see what really is going on within India, what sort of violations are taking place, what are the different aspects of this issue that are being discussed, what really matters at the moment and what is going on, and how do we see moving forward what needs to be done for the women and for Muslims within India. We'll also, at the end of the show, take a small look at what is going on within our own country, as discussed before, with specific reference to the province of Balochistan and how there are terrorist incidents spiking in the country. We've seen that just recently Prime Minister Imran Khan and the Chief of Army Staff, General Qamar Javed Bajwa, went to Balochistan and met with the troops there as well. There has been a high-level army huddle as well that has been briefed today, where the Army Chief has presided over the 247th Corps Commanders meeting, and this Corps Commanders conference has taken place today with increased morale and commitment and the resolve to fight against any terrorist outfits, whatever the cost, and to protect the citizens of the country from such elements. We'll discuss in further detail at the end of the show what this is and how this response is going to impact the way moving forward, how Pakistan is going to deal with this problem in the country. As you can see, I have with me in the studios Raja Faisal and Farrukh Pitafi, as always, in the studio. And for our first segment in the show with regards to what is going on in India, we'll shortly be joined by the Minister of Human Rights, Ms. Shiri Mazari, and in the middle of the show we'll also be joined by All India Progressive Women's Association, Kavita Krishnan. We have now been joined by Ms. Shiri Mazari, who's the Minister of Human Rights. Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking the time out and being part of the show. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
With what is going on with reference to what we see in India is obviously nothing new and not shocking in terms of what the Modi regime has been doing in terms of making life difficult for the Muslim men and women in the country. But of course, the way that we see that this is being seeping into the lives of people, of students in the country, is obviously very devastating as well. The kind of videos that have gone viral and the kind of problems that they're being faced with. The right to wear a hijab or the right to wear anything comes down to the right to their freedom of expression and their choice to wear whatever they want. Is this something completely hard to understand for the people in India, for the courts, for the political leaders, that such a freedom, which is a basic right of the Muslim women or any woman for that matter, to express herself in any way that she wants, is a complicated thing for the people in India to understand?
No, I think it's in fact enshrined in the Indian constitution, and what the fascist Modi government is doing is contravening their own constitution. And unfortunately, this is not something that has happened out of the blues. If you look at in the Modi government's actions against the minorities, especially Muslims in India, you'll see a growing tide of oppression, of harassment, and effectively, if you compare it with what happened in Nazi Germany in the 30s, you'll see this is how the Nazis began and eventually led to the genocide of the Jewish people. The same is happening in India with Muslims and with other minorities, but primarily with Muslims. If you saw in Assam a while back, they had started denying Indian Muslim citizens their right to citizenship. They were cancelling their citizenship. Then we've had attacks on Muslims, Muslim Indians on pretext of eating beef. We have had attacks on Muslims on a number of issues. Then now we are seeing this issue of the hijab that has come up. Now, we have always stated very clearly that countries that deny women the right, Muslim women the right to wear their covering is basically denying them their rights. This is part of Islamophobia. But in India, it's a much bigger threat because it's part of the whole process of gradually trying to eliminate the Muslims of India from India. And this is the dangerous thing. And it's very unfortunate that the international community or human rights groups internationally are taking notice. But the governments in the West refuse to pressurize India, which they should be doing. They're pressurizing the Afghan government, and rightly so, for opening up schools for girls. But this hypocrisy that exists, where Muslim women are targeted, that in some European countries they're denied the right to work, the right to education if they cover their heads. Now in India, where we're seeing a mass persecution of Muslims, we're seeing silence on the part of the Western countries. So the Western governments, I should say. And this is unfortunate because this is a planned, gradual escalation against the Muslim citizens of India by the Modi government.
Right, Minister Sahiba, since we are talking about two aspects which are happening, one inside India, secondly, what India is doing in Kashmir. And I remember the dossier that your ministry and foreign ministry actually presented where human rights violations and use of chemical weapons have been found in Kashmir. So is there any legal recourse for anybody who believes in human rights in India?
I think, look, there are two issues. One is what the Indians, as you said, are doing to their own Indian citizens. What they're doing in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is even worse because that is a disputed occupied territory. The case is before the UN Security Council, and the Fourth Geneva Convention lays out clear rules on how occupation powers have to act. And what the Indians are doing in IIOJK is clearly war crimes because you cannot change demography of an occupied territory. You cannot use the soil. You can't change the status of that occupied territory. India is trying to do both. So it is actually guilty of committing war crimes. And also, according to the Fourth Geneva Convention, people who belong to the occupied territory, the Kashmiris, cannot be removed from that territory and placed in prisons in the occupation state, in the occupying state. So, and that is what India is also doing. Then you mentioned about use of chemical weapons. Exactly. And also pellet guns. You know, pellet guns are banned under the weapons convention. There are inhumane weapons convention. India is a signatory to it. Yet India is using pellet guns, which are used for hunting animals actually. Then India has done mass rape as a weapon of war. The case of Kunan and Pashpora, the two villages, is there in the Indian courts, and it's also in the public domain of information. So all these things have been happening, and yet the world refuses to take action against what is clearly a fascist agenda, one of genocide, and they continue to appease India just as the European countries appeased Hitler. and we saw what happened when they did that.
Right, and as you rightly pointed out, that there are so many things that are going wrong, and there's so many things that India is guilty of with regards to what laws are already in place, both within India, the constitution, and of course international norms and practice as well, and other conventions, as you mentioned. But sadly, even though these things are in place, India still can get away with not following them, not abiding by them, without any sort of consequence. Don't you think that perhaps we should also hold accountable those bodies and institutions that are there to ensure that these laws and practices are followed, and if not, something does happen to the person or the country who's guilty?
Exactly. And I want to point out here that the European Union has brought out very clear parameters of their foreign policy. And in that, they have said that occupation countries when they're illegally occupying a territory, will be sanctioned. And Russia has been sanctioned because of the Crimea by the European Union. Now, my point is, if you yourself have laid out certain standards for your foreign policy actions, then you cannot pick and choose where you will implement them, because then your own policies lose their credibility, and this is unfortunately what is happening. We also, of course, have other means, but ICJ, a country has to accept the jurisdiction. But the United Nations Security Council can take action under Chapter 7 of the Charter, and unfortunately, India at the moment happens to be a member of the Security Council. So there are a lot of problems. I think Pakistan has many options which it has not yet tried, and we need to push for them, because the Prime Minister, for the first time, changed the narrative on occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The Indian narrative was killed because he drew the linkage between Hindutva and the Nazi ideology, and this whole drama that India used to do about terrorism and so on in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Nobody bought that. If you'll notice, after the Prime Minister's first speech, Prime Minister Imran Khan's first speech in the UN General Assembly, the international media for the first time has started exposing Indian human rights violations.
Right. Yeah,
The
and
European Parliament
so
has
glad,
held
ma'am,
hearings
you brought
and
up
so on.
this,
So things have been moving, but we need to push further.
right. Minister Sahib, I'm so glad that you brought up this analogy, because not only you are a minister, you are also a professor. Let me ask you about this sense of history. When we compare India with the Nazi Germany, it took 10 years for Nazis to actually logically reach their culmination point and end somewhere, and they were removed. Do you think that it is going to take that long now, whatever is happening in India right now?
No, the fact is that the Nazis were not removed as such. The Nazis lost a war. World War II happened.
Exactly.
And in World War II, because the world was appeasing the Nazis, the Munich appeasement by Prime Minister Chamberlain of the UK and other European countries, the Nazis began their occupation. And once they started occupying from the Sudetenland and so on, till they attacked Poland, then the world woke up. But the fact is that what happened, it took a world war to stop the Nazis and their agenda, the fascist agenda. I don't think within the nuclear environment the world can afford to wait for a war that India may start. They need to act before this Modi's fascist agenda gets further.
Dr. Shiri Mazari, don't you think if, right now the role OIC should have been playing, the role is not being played by OIC, and if we look at the timeline of of the things happening with the Muslims within India, nothing was done. Mere statements were issued by OIC, and I think this is the right time that OIC must play its role.
I think OIC needs to play a better role, certainly, especially if they talk about the Muslim Ummah. So look what is happening to the Muslims in occupied Jammu and Kashmir and within India itself. A time has come for the OIC to, obviously war is not an option, but sanctions make a big difference. Why the OIC should consider the option of sanctions. The EU needs to examine what it will do, because the EU Parliament has held hearings. Now, in fact, today, there was a congressional discussion for the first time on what is happening in India about hate and violence and so on. This is a development. The British Parliament has taken notice of India's human rights violations in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. So things are happening in different centers of the world. We need to push that further. We need to be able to engage more intensely. And I think we should call out the OIC for that. Why are they not imposing sanctions? Look at what India is now doing on the hijab issue.
Yeah, Dr. Mazari, if we look at the elections of India, every time there is an election, we see that all of these anti-Islam waves, we see them constantly coming up. Is the Western world looking at it? And if it is looking at it, why they still keep on calling them the biggest democracy of the world?
Well, this has been nurtured over a period of time, that they've had a civilian government, they've had, so in that sense, and they've had regular elections. So yes, supposedly they are a democracy. But the rights of the minorities have been trampled upon, and this is something that has really come about in the Modi era, the BJP's rise to power, unfortunately. And along with that has come communalism and the Hindutva agenda. But the point, look, in elections, lots of things are said. What we have to look at is if the policies that the government that is elected continues with the rhetoric of elections. Unfortunately, the Modi government has not just carried forward its hate rhetoric during elections, it has in fact made it much worse. Their policies are worse than what the rhetoric was during elections.
Right, Madam Minister, since you earlier mentioned about it as well, the demographic change in Kashmir, let me take you back to Kashmir. And we have just heard that the settlements created for Kashmiri Pandits are very distinct and they are like a military chownies. The question right now is that there seems to be an Israeli model being employed in Kashmir, right? Where they are taking land away from the people and giving it to others. And then there are Hindu immigrants also, migrants also that might actually get that property. What can Pakistan do to actually call attention to it and seek justice for Kashmiris in this aspect?
Well, Pakistan can go to the UN General Assembly and try get a resolution for an advisory opinion from the ICJ on this demographic change, because the ICJ has given rulings on the Palestinian wall and so on, talking about this being a war crime. So there is a precedence, and if it's a war crime, then Pakistan can call on the international community to take action. We need to focus more on bringing this war crime allegation to fruition. We need to push this aspect of India's occupation in occupied Jammu and Kashmir more vividly before the world. And we need to say it, and we need to engage civil society groups abroad. There is a big Kashmiri diaspora, especially in Europe and in the UK. And that needs to be more active because they have a lot of electoral strength. Remember, they're citizens of the European countries and of the UK, and therefore their voices matter because of the electoral processes in those countries. So we need to activate the Kashmiri diaspora in a much more cohesive manner.
Right. Do you think that with regards to all of these measures that you're saying, a lot of them, of course, have been taken in the past as well, and agree that a lot more aggressive action in this regard is being taken at various fora, and much more can be done in that. But do you think that perhaps we may be moving towards a redundancy of these measures instead of actual progress where we can gain from going back to the UN and keep on highlighting these issues? And if not, then do we have a limit in the way that we're moving forward as to when we will go for other options, or see to it that if one strategy is not working, we can perhaps look for other ways to highlight the issue? Is that an option for us?
Dr. Saba, just to add in, especially looking at the current geopolitical situation of the region, especially US-China trade war going on. During this US-China trade war, of course, India has aligned itself with the Americans In this scenario, should we, see all of these organizations and the bigger countries, the most powerful countries of the world, do something about today's India?
Look, one of the things is I don't agree that things become redundant. One of the problems that we've had in the past is there's been no consistency in our Kashmir policy. When an uprising happens in occupied Kashmir, then we give statements. That used to be the trend. Otherwise, there would be no statement or no activity actually in on Kashmir. But after Prime Minister Imran Khan came, we have seen a continuation and keeping the pitch up, as it were, on India's human rights violations, its war crimes, the fascist agenda. So this is something we have to keep saying over and over and over again. Nothing gets redundant. It's still a dispute in the UN Security Council, and we need to continue to do that. But alongside that, there are many other options that we have not tried yet, which we should try. And the question about the war between China, the trade war between China and the US, look, obviously the superpowers have their own interests, but if you look at the latest joint statement between China and Pakistan, you will see that the Chinese have come out much more strongly on Kashmir than they did before, which is a big development for Pakistan.
Right. You said there are many options that we perhaps may not have explored. Can you identify what options do we have?
Well, one is, of course, there is going to use the universal jurisdiction factor. I don't want to go into too much detail because things are being considered and are happening, so it's premature to lay out everything. Then there is also the fact that we should have engaged the international community and international think tanks in possible solutions that could take place in accordance with UN Security Council resolutions, because any solution to Kashmir issue has to be in line with the UN Security Council resolutions, because Pakistan's role as a party to the dispute is enshrined in the UN Security Council resolutions. So we can never say that they are redundant. UN Security Council resolutions are critical, especially for Pakistan, and it's been unfortunate that some of our previous rulers started questioning those resolutions.
Absolutely. Let me also welcome in the show Ms. Kavita Krishnan, who's All India Progressive Women's Association. Thank you very much for joining us in the debate. Ms. Kavita, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes.
Great. With reference to what, of course, has happened in India with regards to the ban on hijab and the way that we have seen Muslim women students stand up for their rights, and the way this is being intensified in response to what is a basic right of the Muslim women, this is something that we know is happening throughout India, which is, of course, causing the lives of such women become increasingly difficult. But what really is the issue at hand? What is the problem, perhaps, if we want to be able to deconstruct the kind of justifications that are coming out as to how this is a hindrance to education? What really is the problem with allowing women the freedom to choose what they wear?
Thank you so much. Yeah. So I think that basically the issue is that of Hindu supremacist politics and their vision of a Hindu nation that will basically shrink the rights of women and the rights of Muslims. And that's what you're seeing here. Hijab is only a pretext. And basically any visible sign of Muslimness, that is what they are attacking, that is what they are trying to stigmatize. But unfortunately, because it is the hijab, there is a lot of confusion in people's minds also, in general people's minds also, because the idea is that, oh, it's a school uniform or a college uniform, so how can you wear something other than the uniform inside those spaces? Then the other issue that is being raised is that isn't hijab patriarchal? And what we are saying basically is that, for one thing, in India, wearing this, for instance, Sikhs, they can wear the turban with their school uniform, with the police uniform, with the army uniform. There's never been an issue. So why discriminate against the hijab, which also Muslim women have often worn in schools and all when I was growing up without any big issue being created over it, right? So this is a false, this is a completely made up thing that is happening.
And isn't it the imposition of something which is actually patriarchal?
Exactly. It's the imposition which is the problem. And I think that for your audience to understand really what's happening in terms of that, that politics, it's very ironical, isn't it? That in a way, the forces in Pakistan who try to force women to wear hijab. There is a lot of protests that I know of feminists in Pakistan against that. And the same people who are forcing that, they will also say, don't wear Western clothes, don't do this, don't do that. Likewise, in India, these Hindu supremacist groups who are agitating against the hijab, they are known for their background, their history, their record of attacking women for going to pubs, for wearing Western clothes, for dancing, etc., etc. So the point is that, if you're imposing something on someone, forcing someone to wear something, forcing someone not to wear something, basically you are a thug. You are a patriarchal thug. And I really wish that the South Asian subcontinent and India and Pakistan in particular, who have suffered at the hands of such thugs too much. Really, it's high time that we raised our voices. We stopped seeing the differences that we have as Hindus and Muslims or whatever it is inside our respective countries and started saying, hello, these thugs telling women what to wear, telling minorities how to behave, telling who is blasphemous and who has done sacrilege and who should be killed. Enough. I mean, they have us captive as this, and it's really high time that they did not do that. Yeah.
Dr. Shiri, I'll come towards you. Just wanted to ask you, this act of the girl called Muskan Khan, the way she came out, don't you think that India always, boasted about having a constitution that is a secular constitution and it's a secular state, and she was there, her shouting Allahu Akbar, it meant that she is out there to safeguard that secular constitution India always boasted about against the Hindutva ideology, which is persisting in today's India, especially since BJP is ruling in there. Dr. Shiri?
Right.
I think we've
Right,
Perhaps we've
let
lost
me take
contact
this
with Mr.
opportunity to
Mizari.
go to
if we-
Kavita ji with your permission. Kavita ji, since you were
Yeah.
talking about patriarchy, I understand, and I totally am with you when it comes to the rights for women everywhere. Let me ask you about the structural patriarchy. At this moment, it seems that in Karnataka, a high court, this matter went and it was agitated. There is a justice Dixit. You must have followed the case. Now
Yes.
they have decided to go for a full court. But with due respect, the kind of proceedings that went on and the kind of questions that came from Justice Dixit, does it inspire any kind of confidence?
See, when the rights of women have come into courts, I have never been full of confidence. I have usually been full of great fear, no matter what the kind of case it is. And also especially when this is a combination of Muslim women and issues of gender, I feel as though the courts tend to be particularly prejudiced, and I worry that basically the fundamental rights of women are not safe necessarily. Courts are supposed to protect our constitutional rights. I also disagree with some of the arguments that were brought from the petitioners also. For me, I think I know that there have been court judgments that have upheld the fundamental right of Muslim women to wear a hijab on the grounds that it is an essential practice in Islam. But to my mind, really, and in order to prove it is an essential practice, you are reading out all kinds of texts and interpretations of texts,
It's
religious
irrelevant.
texts, which are quite problematic, quite wrong, I would say. So I would say that the argument should be couched in terms of the right to privacy. That is also a fundamental right for Indian citizens. The fundamental right to privacy, the fundamental right to autonomy, and the fact that you simply cannot have and you can't you can't forget the broader picture, that these women had convinced their colleges that they can be allowed to wear it. Some thugs, politically backed thugs, they mobilize, they create a false issue here, a false equivalence between saffron shawls and hijab and whatnot, and now they managed to achieve a ban on the hijab inside
Right.
colleges today. So how wrong is that? The court should
Right.
be able to see that.
And
Unfortunately, as I said, I'm not terribly confident, but one can only hope. Yeah.
right, and you can say, just one second, with reference to what you're saying, of course, in terms of how this is beyond religious practice as well, and perhaps this whole debate of whether this is an essential practice or not is irrelevant in the question. Similarly, I feel this also transcends the issue between Muslims and Hindus, and it becomes an issue which is applicable to all women with the way that they need to be able to be free in terms of choosing, in terms of their right to privacy. Do you see that sort of support coming in from the community, from women, from belonging to other religion, particularly Hindu women, standing out in support of these Muslim girls?
Well, I was told I was a little heartened and little happy to hear from some of the girls who are, from some of the women who are fighting there in Karnataka, that some of their Hindu women friends have actually supported them, and they have not supported this demand that the hijab be banned or whatever. So I have heard of support of that kind. I also know that we are just in the process of drafting a statement which will be signed by a variety of women's groups, a very large number of women's groups from all over the country, as well as other democratic rights groups. And we will also be taking that statement out for mass signatures, both online as well as offline. And I hope that that statement will basically clarify the position, remove the confusions that are being planted in people's heads through a very wrong-headed kind of coverage in the media, and basically persuade a very large number of people that this is not okay. And today, in the name of today, in the name of sorry, today in the name of today they will ban the hijab. Tomorrow they will say, the same people will come and say, you're not allowed to wear jeans, you're not allowed to wear Western clothes, you're not allowed to dance.
It ends nowhere.
Right. That has been happening as well. Very quickly, regarding that case as well, there too, there was this lawyer called Advocate Kamath, who actually identified himself as a Brahmin Hindu, and yet he was standing for the rights of women. So there is hope. But there is a political dimension to it as well, ma'am. Elections are taking place in UP, elsewhere. Do you think that in coming days it is going to play into the hands of BJP and it is going to help them? And if that is so, that means more consolidation of Bhajapa's control. Do you see any reset button as well?
Well, I don't think that this is going to be a very big issue in UP, if you ask my personal opinion. And I don't think that the whole thing may have been orchestrated only with UP in mind. I think that Karnataka's internal politics also plays a thing. Basically, these are various student and youth groups, ABVP, etc. They want, a friend from Mangalore was just telling us today that Mangalore, which has so many colleges and so many hijab-going women in all the variety of colleges there, and occasionally, these right-wing groups make it an issue. But right now, there is not a single protest of that kind against the hijab going on in Mangalore colleges. It is going on in this Udupi region, Udupi, Mandya, Shimoga, where this particular student group and similar groups don't have that much membership. So they are trying to boost their own membership, etc. over there.
Don't you think that this hate reaching to the colleges, reaching to the universities, it's more dangerous now, because previously what we saw was the mob lynchings and all of these things. Of course, that wasn't the educated class we were talking about, but this is a class that is going to colleges and universities, and we expect them to be more saner than the others. But if it is reaching in the colleges and universities, it is more lethal getting day by day for India. Don't you think that?
And then I hope you can also finish the thought about reset button.
Yeah, I don't think, you're asking about how to create a reset button.
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So I didn't get that. Okay. So I want to say that, well, one of the first mob lynchings I remember, which happened in Pune in 2014, just after the Modi regime came to power. As far as I recall, the perpetrators in that case, they killed a young engineer, if I remember right, Muslim engineer. And as far as I remember, the perpetrators were educated and came from a similar class. So I don't think, unfortunately, I don't think necessarily, I think in fact that middle class educated section has in fact been quicker to get radicalized and all of that.
Right.
And
And
right
more.
now, if you look at it, these online auction of Muslim women, etc., it was young educated youth, women and men who were
Exactly. Yes.
participating in this.
Yes, so perhaps it's more than class. It's the fact that these are young minds. These are the youths that are going to grow into the future generations, and the way that they think and believe and perceive and interact with each other is going to have far-reaching impacts. Also, in terms of what we expect from the future leaders as well. In terms of course, how this actually transcends just the issue of hijab, and is something that perhaps different members of the community can also talk about. Is this something that is being done on a scale in different parts of India, which is in relation to human rights, with the way things are going on for the Muslim men and women in the country?
Oh, yes. I think that there is a tremendous, opposition to this as well. And I also want to point out that in my experience, I interact very regularly with large numbers of young students and so on. I know a lot of teachers who interact with young students. And I think in Delhi, for instance, and I would say that there is a shift coming where a large number of young people, while some may fall prey to radicalization, there is a very large number of young people who are able to see through this and who are absolutely against this and this kind of politics of Hindu supremacy and hatred. And they're also interested in employment. They're able to keep their minds focused on those issues of employment. They're able to see that the government is simply using their sentiments, etc. And that's where I see the reset button, where I think the reset button comes from basically two or three things. One is that we need to be able to interact with ordinary people, ordinary citizens in India, without assuming, no matter where they may have voted, without assuming that they are already 100% radicalized. They're not. Most people vote for all kinds of very, very short term things in mind. They don't necessarily vote for the Hindu supremacist agenda. And all of that. So I think there is a lot of scope still to basically talk to people about their genuine issues and get them to recognize their own biases, to ask themselves that if you have a problem, if you think the hijab is wrong or patriarchal, you didn't think Indira Gandhi was wrong for wearing covering over her head, or Pratibha Patil. Maybe they did it out of deference to patriarchal sentiment in society. But no one banned it. No one made a big debate over it. No one created a big fuss over it or demonstrated against it, right? So
and that
surely these
is
young women should be able to wear what they like without this big fuss.
For sure.
and with due respect, that actually at times frightens one as well, because they are sitting here looking at the discourse. Usually, saner voices like you are not that much visible in the media. Not the, most of the people keep on going for or feeding into the same echo chamber. So
Yeah.
it becomes frightening that perhaps Indian mind has become flat. But since you brought up the issue of class, let me also go to another issue which is equally important, that is caste. Because as a student of social sciences, we need data, and we know that Narendra Modi's government is avoiding a caste census for quite some time. Do you think that
Right.
because of lack of this data also, there will be repercussions where radicalization becomes more rampant?
No, I don't think that exactly. I think that the caste survey is important, and why shy away from facts? Whatever are the facts, let them come forward. You have so many categories in the census. You do a caste census as well. What's wrong with that? Absolutely, but I don't think that the answer to that, that the radicalization and caste are linked in such a simple way. I think that castes, Indian society is basically riddled with caste. I would say that South Asian society is riddled with caste. You have caste in India, you have caste even in Pakistan, you have caste even in Sri Lanka, you have caste even in Nepal. So I would say that this is such a huge problem. It is so deeply entrenched. Caste has managed to sort of horizontally enter every kind of religion, religious community in the South Asian subcontinent. You say Muslims, you say Sikhs, you say Christians, there is caste, among them. There are Dalit Christians in, Christian oppression of Christians in Pakistan has a caste dimension, a hidden caste dimension. No one will talk about it or admit it, but they are Dalits and they are mostly doing sanitation work. So it's like that. And therefore, I think that the issue of caste is such that it's very important for society to face it upfront and come to terms with it and acknowledge the tremendous discrimination that's happening. But it's also important, I think, for the oppressed castes to recognize the danger of what Dr. Ambedkar said, Hindu
Very
Raj will be
quickly,
the
just
worst
to qualify
calamity
my
for
point,
India.
I actually pointed out that there seems to be an elite capture by a certain upper caste. And as long as the data is not there, everyone is going to surrender because they don't know their own voice, that they are actually a majority, an oppressed majority, and there is an elite capture. That's why Narendra Modi and his government keep on hiding this fact.
Faisal, your question?
Yeah, Kavita, I just wanted to know, do you think that there are voices in India who can come in future on screens like yourself and say that Mr. Modi, enough is enough, and I think this is the time that we should be reviving the status of being a secular state, India being a secular state, and India, a secular India, should be revived by the senior voices like yourself?
She's very courageous.
Well, there are actually many who are doing that. The point is that on Indian media, that media is largely captured by much of the media, much of the mainstream media, much of the television media that you see, barring some honorable exceptions, and there are many honorable exceptions, but the dominant media that you get to see is largely basically a propagandist for Islamophobic forces and the Modi regime. So, I have taken a principled position not to be on those screens actually, and so have many others, because I feel that it's like being on Rwanda radio. Why would you go? But I think that there are people managing to create other spaces, for instance, online spaces and so on, where there is much more sensible stuff happening. There are any number of YouTube channels and so on which have large followings, which which have a sober, sensible take on so many things, and sober, sensible discussion and debate, which is not simply, bringing the worst caricatures.
We're almost out of time. My last question to you with regards to what you spoke about earlier is that when we see that a large percentage of the youth you're saying is not as radicalized, or there are quite a few that you can find which are perhaps not radicalized, and there's hope for them. But what about the ones that are? What about the ones that are on that trajectory, are going towards that, or are already there? Is there something that is being done for the youth who have already been there to prevent them, or to rehabilitate them, or to change them? Is there work being done for that?
No, in one word, no, because you see, that is an enormously powerful echo chamber, which has powerful social networks, so Telegram channels, WhatsApp groups, that. This is an entire ecosystem, and which feeds in on itself. Getting through there and being able to speak to those caught in that net is extremely hard, extremely difficult. And I think that, that is, because that those networks have the state's protection, and the state stands between, anybody like us, any groups like ours, and those networks. It is not easy. But I would say that, the larger effort to basically create dialogues where maybe something will one day make sense. We are trying to create networks where people actually don't exit their family groups and, the dialogues with their family members and so on who are radicalized. And we have tried to produce some kind of guidelines on how to conduct these discussions, these difficult discussions with people in your life who are radicalized. I think that those efforts are ongoing. We can only hope that they will have some success.
Good luck for that.
That answer did pain me, but thank you very much, Kavita, for joining us and taking the time out. It was a pleasure listening to your conversation. and we commend your courage as to what you're doing sitting in India. With regards to, of course, what is going on in India, there is so much that still remains to be discussed and seen, and a lot of change that we hope for. There's also a lot that's going on in our country, and we had to discuss a little bit about what is going on with reference to Balochistan as well. Where the Army Chief General Qamar Javed Bajwa, after his visit, has also vowed not to allow the terrorist outfits to revive, something that has resonated with the sentiments of Farrukh over here, one of my analysts, and we've debated about this largely. But with reference to what has been said, Farrukh, of course, the resolve and the commitment has always been there, and we all need that to be there. But in terms of action, what really does it mean? Is it what you've been asking for?
Right, Sana, the fact remains that while sitting here, I can contribute to the narrative, but I'm doing practically nothing to fight terrorism, right? With the exception of fighting ideas of propaganda. Let me remind you that for 20 years, it is our soldiers, it is our policemen, it is our law enforcement that have been valiantly fighting terrorism.
Absolutely.
And there have been stories someday, if we are going to compile the stories, you will see that the entire world will actually shake. That kind of courage. So at this moment, it is important that when you're like 90% done with a problem, you carry through and you get rid of all the problems that remain, right? Then you can have a peaceful focus on resolving the underlying issues. That was actually highlighted 20 years ago by Pervez Musharraf Sahab as well. So at this moment, it is important that you A, get rid of the terrorists, B, their sympathizers, their financiers, and anybody who might be aiding or abetting them.
Right.
Once you're done with that, then you can take care of the underlying problems as well.
Yeah, and Sana, I just wanted to add that clear stance is there, and now I think there is no way to look back. This is the time that we need to move on bluntly, move on more vigorously, and we have to chase them out because enough is enough. And I think the statement itself says the same. Enough is enough.
And the end objective, of course, is that we want peace for our citizens and security for our citizens, and that is, of course, that is what the resolve has always been. And the sacrifices that our troops have given, of course, are unparalleled and outnumbered, and there's so much that we perhaps take for granted. So our heart goes out to all of them who have continued to give peace and security to the citizens of Pakistan.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for that. Keep watching the debate. That's all we have time for in the discussion. We'll come back tomorrow with more stories.